The galaxy expected humans to share scientific data. No one expected them to break physics while laughing on stage. I should have known something was wrong when the humans arrived late. My name is Velthris, and I am, or rather was, a highly respected astrophysicist from Krynar Prime. Our species prides itself on precision, punctuality, and the proper reverence for scientific inquiry. We do not joke about the fundamental forces of the universe. We do not laugh during lectures. We certainly do not show up 20 minutes past the scheduled start time, eating what appeared to be compressed carbohydrate tubes covered in some kind of processed meat. But humans, oh humans. The interstellar science exchange was supposed to be a dignified affair. Station Harmony, a neutral territory floating in the Andromeda sector, had been chosen specifically for its reputation for order and decorum. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered in the main auditorium, each of us eager to share our greatest scientific achievements. The Quilorians brought their temporal mathematics. The Screeth demonstrated their biotechnology. My own people presented our dark matter containment theory. And then it was humanity's turn. I had positioned myself in the third row, close enough to absorb every detail but far enough to maintain appropriate academic distance. My data tablet was ready, my recording equipment calibrated. I had done my research on humans. Naturally, they were the newest species to achieve faster-than-light travel, having only joined the galactic community 3 cycles ago. Their home planet Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, one of the most hostile environments known to produce sentient life. The statistics were genuinely impressive. Humans had survived predators, diseases, natural disasters, and countless extinction-level events. They had gone from primitive tool users to spacefaring civilization in a mere 10,000 rotations. Their technological advancement was exponential. Their military capabilities, though we all pretended not to notice, were terrifying. So naturally, I expected their scientific presentation to reflect this remarkable heritage. The auditorium held approximately 800 beings. The air filtration system worked overtime to accommodate everyone's atmospheric requirements, creating a faint humming that normally helped me concentrate. The lighting was set to neutral spectrum, the temperature carefully regulated. Everything was perfect, organized, proper. Then, the humans walked in. Dr. Rebecca Torres entered first. Her dark hair pulled back in what my research indicated was called a ponytail, wearing casual attire that would have gotten any Krenarian scientist expelled from an academic institution. Behind her came Professor James Whittaker, tall and thin, carrying what appeared to be a box of props. Props for a scientific lecture. They were both smiling, not the polite acknowledgement smile of professional courtesy, but genuine broad expressions that showed their teeth. Several species in the audience shifted uncomfortably. The Horthax delegate actually hissed, interpreting the display as a threat gesture. Rebecca walked to the podium completely unbothered by the fact that 800 beings had been waiting for her. She tapped the microphone twice, and the resulting feedback screech made my sensory stalks retract involuntarily. "Is this thing on?" she asked, then laughed at her own question. "Sorry we are late, everyone. Traffic was terrible. You know how it is when you are traveling at 0.97 light speed and someone decides to drop out of hyperspace right in front of you without signaling." James here wanted to give them a piece of his mind, but I reminded him that interstellar road rage is probably not the best way to start diplomatic relations. I did not understand approximately 60% of what she had just said, but several humans in the audience made loud exhalation sounds that my translator identified as laughter. The rest of us exchanged confused glances. Anyway, Rebecca continued, pulling up a holographic display behind her. "We are here today to talk about gravity. You know, that thing that keeps your feet on the ground and your coffee in your cup, assuming you have feet, and cups, and drink coffee. No offense to our methane-breathing friends in the back." The title of their presentation materialized in glowing letters above them: Gravity, the universe's longest-running prank. I felt my primary heart sink while my secondary heart accelerated in what I can only describe as academic horror. This was going to be a disaster. James stepped forward, placing his box on the demonstration table with a theatrical flourish that seemed entirely unnecessary. He pulled out what looked like a rubber sphere and held it up for everyone to see. "Before we begin," he announced, "I want everyone to know that Rebecca and I have been studying gravitational physics for a combined 73 years, which sounds impressive until you realize we spent at least 20 of those years just trying to figure out why toast always lands butter side down." More laughter from the human section. I noticed that Ambassador Krilltalk from Thethrone 4 had actually stood up, presumably to leave. I was tempted to join him. The only thing stopping me was the 3-hour journey back to my quarters and the knowledge that I would have to explain to my colleagues why I had walked out of the human presentation. Rebecca grinned at James's comment. The toast thing is actually related to gravity, rotational dynamics and the standard height of human tables. We did the math. It was depressing. Should we tell them about the time you tried to prove you could calculate the exact trajectory of a drop sandwich? James asked. That was one time and I was sleep deprived. You were in a zero-gravity environment, Rebecca, which is exactly why it was so confusing when it still fell. They both laughed at this exchange, and I found myself utterly baffled. Next to me a Vryxian mathematician named Korth leaned over, his translation collar crackling slightly. Is this normal for humans, he whispered. Should we be concerned about their mental stability? I have no idea, I whispered back, but I am beginning to understand why their planet is classified as a death world. They clearly had to develop psychological defense mechanisms. On stage, Rebecca finally seemed ready to begin the actual presentation. She manipulated the holographic controls, and a stunning 3-dimensional model of a gravitational field appeared in the space above the audience. I had to admit, despite everything, the visualization was exceptional. The field lines curved and warped with perfect mathematical precision, showing the distortion of space-time around a massive object. All right, Rebecca said, her tone shifting just slightly towards something more professional. Let us talk about what gravity actually is, because apparently some species still think it is a force. Looking at you, Cranarian delegation, I felt my sensory stalks stiffen in indignation. Our theory of gravity as a force had been the dominant model for 600 cycles. James jumped in before I could formulate a proper academic rebuttal. Now before anyone gets upset, let us explain. Gravity is not really pulling you down. Space itself is curved by mass, and you are just following the straightest possible path through that curved space. You are not being pulled toward planets. You are sliding down the slopes of bent reality. It is like imagine space-time as a giant cosmic blanket, and every star and planet is someone sitting on that blanket. Except the blanket is 4-dimensional, Rebecca added, and the people sitting on it are also made of blanket. And the blanket is simultaneously the thing being bent and the thing doing the bending. And actually there is no blanket. It is just a helpful metaphor we use because human brains evolved to throw rocks at prey animals, not to intuitively understand tensor calculus. The auditorium had gone very quiet. I was not sure if everyone was stunned by the casual brilliance of that explanation or simply confused by the delivery method. Show of hands, James said, actually requesting physical participation. Who here has ever thought about what would happen if gravity just, stopped working for 5 seconds? A few tentacles, appendages, and actual hands rose hesitantly. Right. So, fun fact, you would not float away gently. Earth is rotating at about 1,600 kilometers per hour at the equator. Without gravity you would be launched into space at roughly that speed. You would become a meat projectile, a flesh torpedo, a biological bullet. That is the technical term, Rebecca confirmed with absolute seriousness. Flesh torpedo. We got it officially recognized by the International Astronomical Union. They definitely had not. I checked. Later. I am embarrassed to admit how long I spent checking. What happened next was the strangest hour of my academic career, and I once attended a lecture where a Grontharian professor accidentally opened a micro-singularity in the demonstration lab. Rebecca and James proceeded to explain gravitational lensing, the bending of light around massive objects, by claiming that the universe was essentially a giant with poor vision, who needed cosmic contact lenses. They demonstrated the concept by having James hold up a transparent sphere while Rebecca shone a light through it, all while maintaining a running commentary about how photons must feel very confused about the whole situation. Imagine you are a photon, Rebecca said, walking across the stage. You have been traveling in a straight line for millions of years. You have got places to be, photosynthesis to enable, solar panels to activate. Then suddenly you encounter a galaxy, not in your way exactly, but close enough that space-time is curved. You want to keep going straight, but straight has been redefined, so you curve, you bend, you end up somewhere completely different from where you intended, and the whole time from your perspective you were moving in a perfectly straight line. She paused for dramatic effect. Basically, photons are the universe's most law-abiding citizens, and they are constantly being gaslit by gravity. I should not have understood that reference. I should not have found it amusing. I definitely should not have made the chittering sound that cranarians produce when experiencing humor, but I did. I immediately pretended to be clearing my respiratory passages. James then pulled out a series of metal spheres of different sizes and began demonstrating orbital mechanics by quite literally juggling them while explaining how velocity, mass, and gravitational pull interact to create stable orbits. He dropped 3 of them, blamed it on the station's suboptimal gravity calibration, and kept going without missing a beat. "Here is the thing about orbits," he said, finally catching all the spheres. "Everything is falling all the time. The moon is falling toward Earth. Earth is falling toward the sun. The sun is falling toward the galactic center. We are all falling. The only difference between falling and flying is whether you are moving sideways fast enough to keep missing the thing you are falling toward." Rebecca nodded enthusiastically. "Which means astronauts in orbit are not floating in zero gravity. They are falling, constantly. They are in a perpetual state of controlled catastrophe, and they are fine with it. This tells you everything you need to know about human psychology." Then they did something that made my academic training completely short-circuit. They presented an actual equation, a beautiful, elegant, revolutionary equation that described gravitational wave propagation in a way I had never seen before. It was displayed in the hologram, rotating slowly, each variable labeled and explained. And they explained it through a joke about 2 black holes walking into a bar. I will not repeat the joke. It was inappropriate, scientifically questionable, and I absolutely wrote it down word for word in my notes. "The punchline," James said after the laughter had died down, "is that black holes do not walk. They warp space-time so severely that walking becomes a meaningless concept in their vicinity, and bars are unlikely to exist in the extreme radiation environment near an event horizon. But the mathematical principle we just described actually solves a problem with gravitational wave detection that has been bothering researchers for decades." He was right. I ran the numbers later that evening twice, and he was absolutely right. Rebecca brought up another visualization, this one showing gravitational waves rippling through space-time like as she described it, the universe doing the wave at a sports event, except the wave is made of geometry and can stretch and squeeze your atoms. "We actually figured this out," she continued during a very serious scientific discussion at 2 in the morning after consuming probably too much caffeine. James said something stupid about how gravitational waves are just space doing stretches before its morning jog, and then we both started laughing. And then we did the math. And then we stopped laughing because the math worked. And then we started laughing again because of course the ridiculous explanation helped us solve the problem. I was starting to feel dizzy, and not from the station's rotation. "Now," Rebecca announced, rubbing her hands together in a gesture that immediately made me nervous, "we need some volunteers for a demonstration. You, with the impressive exoskeleton in row 5. Yes, you, come on down." Ambassador Krilltuck, who had apparently sat back down at some point, looked around in alarm before pointing at himself with one of his 6 limbs. When Rebecca nodded enthusiastically, he had no choice but to make his way to the stage, his carapace clicking with what I recognized as Thesaron agitation. "What is your name, Ambassador?" James asked. "I am Ambassador Krilltuck of the Thesaron 4, and I really do not think." "Perfect. Ambassador Krilltuck is going to help us demonstrate the equivalence principle. This is the idea that being in a gravitational field is indistinguishable from being in an accelerating reference frame, which sounds complicated but it is actually pretty simple. Ambassador, how much do you weigh on your homeworld? By the Thesaron standards or universal metric. Let us go with kilograms. We are trying to keep this accessible. Approximately 83.5 kilograms. Great. Now if you were in an elevator and that elevator was accelerating upward at exactly 9.8 meters per second squared, would you feel heavier, lighter, or the same?" Krilltuck's translator took a moment to process. "Heavier, presumably." "Right. And if you were in deep space, far from any gravitational sources but in a spacecraft accelerating at 9.8 meters per second squared, what would you feel?" "The same sensation, I suppose." "Exactly. Which means from your perspective, inside the elevator or the spacecraft, you cannot tell the difference between gravity and acceleration. They are equivalent, which Einstein figured out and thought was so cool that he called it the happiest thought of his life. Though I think if your happiest thought is about physics, you might need to get out more, Al." Several audience members made sounds of shock at James's casual disrespect toward one of humanity's legendary scientists. Rebecca just grinned. "Now, Ambassador Krilltuck, here is where it gets fun. We are going to use these anti-gravity projectors. Yes, we have those now. We will get to that in a moment. To reduce the gravitational effect you feel to about half of normal. Tell us how it feels. She activated a device on the demonstration table and Krilltalk immediately wobbled, his limbs flailing slightly. This is extremely disorienting. I feel as though I might fall upward. You cannot fall upward, James said. That is called jumping. But your vestibular system, or whatever Thesrons have that does the same job, is completely confused right now because your brain expects one level of sensory input and is getting something completely different. They let Krilltalk return to his seat, where he sat very still, probably questioning his life choices. Then Rebecca pointed at me. You, Crenarian scientist with the excellent posture. You are next. Oh no. I found myself walking to the stage before my conscious mind had agreed to the decision. Rebecca smiled at me in a way that I think was meant to be reassuring but made me feel like I had volunteered for something that would end with me needing medical attention. Name? James asked. Velthris. Dr. Velthris.
Dr. Velthris.
Fantastic. Now doctor, how many hearts do you have? 2. All Crenarians have 2 hearts. Perfect. We are going to demonstrate tidal forces. Do you know what tidal forces are? I stiffened my sensory stalks in academic pride. Of course. They are the differential gravitational effects across an object due to distance from the gravitational source. They are responsible for oceanic tides on planets with large moons, and at extreme levels they cause spaghettification near black holes. Full marks. Now, we are not going to spaghettify you because that would be rude and probably illegal under station regulations, but we are going to use precisely calibrated gravitational generators to create a tiny tidal effect that you can feel. They activated several devices around me, and I suddenly felt the strangest sensation. It was as if my upper and lower body were being pulled in very slightly different directions. A gentle but distinct differential force that made my sensory stalks tingle. What you are feeling, Rebecca explained to the audience, is essentially what happens near any massive object but scaled down to safe, demonstration-friendly levels. If Dr. Velthris were falling into a black hole, this effect would be extreme enough to literally pull him apart. His feet would be pulled harder than his head, or vice versa depending on orientation, and he would be stretched like taffy. We call this spaghettification. We also call it the universe's worst way to die, James added, which is saying something, because the universe has a lot of creative options in that category. They deactivated the devices, and I returned to my seat on legs that felt oddly unstable. Around me I noticed that beings from dozens of different species were now leaning forward, paying attention in a way they had not been at the start. The Vrixian mathematician next to me was actually taking notes. Rebecca then invited a Quilorian named Synthex to the stage to demonstrate frame dragging, the way rotating massive objects literally drag spacetime around with them. The demonstration involved Synthex standing on a rotating platform while Rebecca and James explained how Earth, the Sun, and every rotating object in the universe does the same thing at scales both massive and minuscule. Imagine, James said, spinning the platform faster, that spacetime is like honey. Not in consistency, obviously. That would make physics very different and also very sticky, but in the sense that when something rotates through it, the honey gets pulled along. Now imagine the honey is 4-dimensional geometry. Now imagine there is no honey. You have just understood frame dragging. I caught myself making the chittering sound again. This time I did not pretend it was anything else. Then something shifted. Rebecca's expression changed, became more focused. James stopped making jokes. The atmosphere in the auditorium transformed in a way that made my sensory stalks stand at full attention. All right, Rebecca said quietly, and somehow that quiet carried more weight than all the humor that had come before. Enough fun. Let us talk about what we actually came here to present. The holographic display changed, showing a complex mathematical framework that made my breath catch in my respiratory passages. It was gravity manipulation theory, but not like anything I had ever seen. The equations were elegant, revolutionary, and they solved problems that had stumped the galactic scientific community for 200 cycles. We figured this out, James said, and his voice had none of the casual humor now. Because we spent years not taking gravity seriously. We joked about it. We made fun of it. We threw things and laughed when they fell. And somewhere in all that laughter we stopped being afraid of not understanding. We stopped being paralyzed by the complexity. We just played with the concepts until they made sense. Rebecca nodded. Every joke we made today, every silly analogy, every stupid pun about space being bent or photons being confused, All of it was built on decades of actual research. We were not making light of the science. We were making the science light enough to carry. She manipulated the controls, and the equations expanded, showing derivations that were simultaneously beautiful and mind-bending. They had found a way to generate controlled gravitational fields without massive objects, using quantum effects and space-time topology in ways that should not have been possible. The reason we presented it this way, James continued, is because that is how we figured it out. Rebecca made a joke about gravity being the universe's way of keeping everything organized, like a cosmic filing system. We laughed about it. Then we thought about it. Then we realized that if you treat gravitational relationships as information topology rather than pure force mechanics, the math becomes much more elegant. The sandwich thing was real, by the way, Rebecca added. I really did try to calculate trajectories in zero gravity while sleep-deprived. I got the math completely wrong, but being wrong in that particular way led us to question some assumptions about how gravity propagates through quantized space-time. Being stupid in the right way at the right time can be incredibly productive. I was writing notes so fast my primary hand was cramping. Around me I could hear the sounds of dozens of species doing the same thing. The Screeth biotechnologist 3 rows back was recording everything, her optical sensors fully dilated. Here is the thing about humanity, James said, and now his voice carried something that made my secondary heart skip. We come from a planet that tried to kill us constantly. Predators, diseases, weather, geological instability, you name it. We could have responded by becoming serious, cautious, careful. Some species do that. But humans, we laughed. We found the absurdity in nearly dying from infection because of a tiny cut. We made jokes about the fact that our own planet's atmosphere would kill us if we breathed the wrong thing. We looked at the universe trying to crush us and said, "That is hilarious. Let us figure out how it works so we can mess with it." Rebecca brought up footage of human scientists from throughout their history. I saw them laughing in laboratories, making silly faces for cameras, pranking each other during serious experiments. I saw astronauts doing ridiculous things in zero gravity. I saw physicists drawing funny cartoons to explain complex theories. We solve problems by refusing to be intimidated by them, Rebecca said. And if making gravity sound like a cosmic prank helps us understand it better, then that is exactly what we will do. The presentation ended with a full technical paper appearing in the holographic space, available for download to all attendees. The math was rigorous, peer-reviewed, and absolutely brilliant. It was also annotated with occasional jokes and cartoon illustrations that somehow made the complex concepts more accessible rather than less. The auditorium erupted in what I can only describe as polite academic chaos. Everyone wanted copies. Everyone had questions. Several ambassadors were already on their communication devices, presumably reporting back to their home worlds. I just sat there, my data tablet full of notes. My understanding of science fundamentally altered. During the break, I approached Rebecca and James with what I hoped was appropriate scientific courtesy. My legs still felt slightly unstable from the tidal force demonstration. "Dr. Torres, Professor Whitaker," I said, keeping my translator carefully modulated to convey respect. "I must admit, when your presentation began, I thought you were mocking the discipline. I was prepared to be offended. But now," Rebecca asked, and I noticed she was drinking something from a container labeled coffee black, strong enough to bend space-time. "Now I am wondering if my entire species has been approaching scientific inquiry incorrectly for 600 cycles. James laughed at that, but it was a kind laugh. "Look, different approaches work for different species. Maybe chronarians do their best work with serious methodical research. That is fine. But humans, we work best when we are enjoying ourselves. Life is short. The universe is weird. And if we cannot laugh at the fundamental absurdity of existence, what is the point?" "The point is knowledge," I said automatically, then paused. "Although I suppose knowledge is more useful when you actually understand it, not just when you have technically memorized the equations." "Now you are getting it," Rebecca said, offering me some of her coffee. I declined, as my species finds caffeine mildly toxic. Science should not be a chore. It should be fun. It should be weird. It should make you laugh, and think, and question and experiment. The moment it becomes too serious, too rigid, you lose the creativity that drives actual discovery. A group of human scientists joined us and Rebecca introduced them. Dr. Nina Okonkwo, who studied xenobiology with, as she put it, an inappropriate amount of enthusiasm for extremely dangerous organisms. Commander Felix Sang, who designed spacecraft propulsion systems and apparently decorated his office with cartoon drawings of rockets with faces. They were all brilliant. They all had impressive credentials. They all made jokes constantly. We heard you got volunteered for the Tidal Force demo, Nina said with a grin. How was it? Disorienting, I admitted. But educational. I have felt gravitational effects before, obviously, but never isolated and controlled like that. It was, I hesitate to say this, enlightening. He hesitates to say it was enlightening. Felix announced to the group. That is the most Crenarian thing I have heard all day. Velthrus, buddy, it is okay to admit when something is cool. We will not tell your colleagues. But the thing was, I wanted to tell my colleagues. I wanted to explain what I had learned, not just about gravity manipulation theory, but about the entire human approach to science. They turned learning into an adventure, problems into puzzles, and the unknowable into the merely difficult. Can I ask you something? I said to Rebecca. Why did you really present the material this way? You could have just shared the technical paper. Everyone would have been impressed. You did not need the jokes and the demonstrations and the everything. She considered the question seriously, her expression thoughtful. Because that is not how we learned it. The technical paper is the end result, the cleaned-up version, the proper academic presentation, but the actual discovery, that was messy and funny and involved a lot of failed experiments and stupid ideas that somehow worked. We wanted people to see the real process, not just the polished conclusion. Science is not a straight line from question to answer. It is a weird, chaotic, hilarious journey, and that journey matters. Also, James added, it is way more fun this way. Life is too short to be boring, especially when you are talking about the fundamental structure of reality. I spent the next hour discussing gravitational physics with the human delegation, and I learned more than I had in the previous 10 cycles of research. Not because the information was new necessarily, but because they explained it in ways that made connections I had never considered. They used metaphors, analogies, jokes, and occasionally actual scientific terminology, all mixed together in a way that should not have worked but absolutely did. The evening symposium was more intimate, only about 50 scientists from various species. The humans had somehow acquired what they called snacks, which appeared to be various Earth foods that they claimed were essential for proper cognitive function. I tried something called a cookie and immediately understood why humanity had conquered their home world. Any species that could create something that good at causing pleasure responses was clearly unstoppable. Dr. Okonkwo gave a presentation on how humor reduces cognitive stress, allowing for better problem solving. She had data, lots of data, showing that human scientists who laugh during difficult problems solve them faster and more creatively than those who remain serious. Our brains are prediction machines, she explained, showing scans of human neural activity. When we encounter something unexpected, like a punchline or a sudden twist, our prediction systems have to rapidly adjust. That process, that moment of surprise and recalibration, actually enhances cognitive flexibility. We are literally making ourselves smarter by confusing ourselves in controlled ways. Commander Zhang demonstrated this by telling a terrible joke about quantum mechanics, then immediately segueing into an explanation of how they had solved a spacecraft stability problem by thinking about it backwards. We kept trying to make the ship more stable, he said, but stability was the problem. We needed controlled instability, so we stopped trying to fix what we thought was broken and started asking what if it was supposed to work that way. Humor teaches you to think sideways. They showed footage from Earth, recordings of human history. I watched human scientists laughing while their experiments exploded. I saw them making jokes during space missions where one wrong calculation would mean death. I watched them turn disasters into learning opportunities and failures into funny stories. We came from a planet that was constantly trying to kill us, Rebecca said, echoing James's earlier comment. Predators that could smell fear, diseases that could kill in hours, weather that could destroy everything we built. We had two choices: become paralyzed by terror, or learn to laugh at danger. We chose laughter, and that choice, made thousands of years ago, shaped everything about how we approach problems. We are not brave because we do not feel fear. We are brave because we feel fear, and make fun of it anyway. A Vrixian engineer asked the question I had been wondering. But does this not make your science less rigorous, less reliable? No, Nina said firmly. It makes it more rigorous, because we are not afraid to be wrong. We are not afraid to look stupid. We will try ridiculous experiments just to see what happens. Some of our greatest discoveries came from someone saying, I know this is dumb, but what if we tried this, and then actually trying it? A scientist afraid of being wrong will never take the risks necessary for real breakthrough. They demonstrated by having various scientists attempt human-style humor, with mixed and often hilarious results. A Horthax biologist tried to make a pun about cellular division and accidentally said something that translated to a mild insult in Quilorian. A Thesseron mathematician attempted sarcasm and just sounded confused. I tried to make a joke about gravitational constants and fumbled the delivery so badly that the humans actually applauded my failure, which I think was meant to be encouraging. The point, James said, is not that everyone needs to be funny. The point is that everyone needs to be willing to be wrong, to look foolish, to try things that might not work. Humor is just one way humans develop to make that easier. Your species might have different methods, but the core principle is the same. Science requires the willingness to fail spectacularly in the pursuit of truth. I returned to my quarters at what Station Harmony's clock system informed me was very late. My sensory stalks were drooping with fatigue, but my mind was racing with new ideas, new perspectives, new ways of thinking about problems I had been stuck on for cycles. I pulled up my notes, reviewing everything I had recorded. The mathematics were solid, revolutionary even. But more important than the equations were the lessons embedded in how the humans had presented them. They had shown us that being smart did not mean being serious, that understanding complex concepts did not require complex explanations, that sometimes the best way to respect a subject was to be willing to laugh at it. I began recording my daily log as was my habit. Station Harmony, Day 12. Attended human presentation on gravitational physics. Initial assessment was that their approach was unprofessional and inappropriate. I paused, my manipulator hovering over the controls. Final assessment: they are either the most brilliant species we have encountered, or we have all been overthinking science for the past 1,000 cycles, possibly both. I hesitated, then added something I had never included in a scientific log before. The humans have a saying, the gravity of the situation. It means something is serious, important, weighty, but gravity itself, as they pointed out, is just curved space-time. It is not inherently serious. We made it serious. We took a fundamental property of the universe and burdened it with the weight of our own academic solemnity. Another pause. My secondary heart was beating faster, the way it did when I was on the edge of understanding something important. Perhaps that is humanity's real gift. They refuse to let the universe intimidate them. They look at black holes and make jokes. They face extinction and laugh. They encounter the infinite complexity of reality and respond by making it fun. This should not work. By all logical analysis, their approach should result in chaos and failure. I looked at the equations on my screen, the revolutionary gravitational manipulation theory that the humans had figured out by, essentially, playing with the concept until it made sense. Instead, they are thriving. They are discovering. They are solving problems that stumped the rest of us, and they are doing it while having fun. I thought about the tidal force demonstration. The way James and Rebecca had made me feel the actual effects of gravity in a controlled, safe way. The way they had turned abstract mathematics into physical sensation. The way they had made me understand, truly understand, not just memorize. Then I did something that would have horrified my colleagues back on Krynar Prime. I attempted a joke. It seems, I recorded, that humans have figured out the secret of gravitational manipulation. They simply refuse to take gravity seriously, which, when you think about it, is the most appropriate response to a force that literally bends reality. The universe makes rules, and humans make fun of them. Perhaps that is why they win. I paused the recording and replayed it. The delivery needed work. The timing was off. The punchline was too obvious. But I had tried, and that was the point. Tomorrow, I would begin adapting some of the human techniques to my own research. I would try explaining my theories to colleagues using metaphors and humor instead of pure equations. I would allow myself to play with concepts instead of just analyzing them. I would risk looking foolish in the pursuit of understanding. The humans had taught me something far more valuable than gravitational manipulation theory. They had taught me that the universe was too vast and strange and wonderful to approach with anything less than joy. And if a species from a Class 12 Deathworld could look at the infinite cosmos and laugh, then surely a Cranarian scientist could manage at least a chitter. I closed my data tablet and prepared for rest, my mind full of equations and jokes, and the revolutionary idea that maybe, just maybe, science was supposed to be fun. The humans were right about one thing. Life was too short to be boring, even when discussing the fundamental structure of reality, especially when discussing the fundamental structure of reality. Tomorrow, I would begin my own research into controlled gravitational fields, but tonight I would let myself appreciate the absurdity of existence. 800 beings from 47 different species, all brought together by humanity's refusal to be intimidated by the universe. And somewhere in the station, I knew Rebecca and James were probably making jokes about the next impossible problem they planned to solve. Humans. They conquered a death world by laughing at it. The rest of us should probably take notes.